a third one, yes, boom. Good morning. Welcome, everyone, to the First Unitarian Congregation of Ottawa. Were you just signaling to me? No, you're just, okay. I thought maybe I was making a mistake or not talking loud enough. I'm the Reverend Linda Goonewardene. I'm an affiliated community minister here. And this morning I am joined by our worship associate, Kate, and by Alex, who will be providing the music today. Yay, Alex. The opening song was not by Sinead O'Connor with lyrics by Elton John. I shifted the song, so if you are reading the service, it was actually a song by Susan Werner, who combines classical music with pop music. And she did Waiting in Vain, a Bob Marley song with music by Satie. Our opening words are by the Reverend Mark Morrison Reed. The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength is too limited to do all that must be done. Together our vision widens and our strength is renewed. And for our opening song today, we will sing hymn number 67 in the Gray Hymnal. We sing now together. Please rise as you are willing and able, and the choir is also going to be leading us. Yay.
Thank you, choir and Alex. Good morning, everyone. Once again, welcome to First Unitarian Congregation of Ottawa. My name is Kate, and I'm delighted to be your worship associate here with all of you of all ages this morning. Whether you are taking part in this worship celebration from your home or wherever else you may be, whenever you may log on, you are welcome here. We acknowledge that our FirstU campus is located on traditional, unsurrendered, and unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, and that the work of reconciliation is a responsibility of our congregation and of all Canadians. Our goal is to educate ourselves and for all those that have the willingness to understand, to be of service to those who are at risk and to advocate for justice. Do take care and take advantage of online opportunities. Stay in touch. We're still very much in a hybrid mode with many online activities. Some of the pandemic is still lingering on, as we know. If you are new to FirstU and you would like more information about us, please contact us through our email at welcome@firstunitarianottawa.ca. And if you do happen to be right here in Worship Hall with us
as traffic is redirected, etc., and to advise on steps that can be taken to make things safer for current residents and future residents. You can read their introductory newsletter from the link in this week's EUU. And FirstU is starting up a house band to perform contemporary music, whatever that means, rock or hip hop or something, at Sunday services and other special events. To join the house band, contact Lisa Sharp at owl@firstunitarianottawa.ca. So we encourage you to sign up to receive the EUU, our weekly email newsletter outlining all the things that are available, and check our Facebook and Instagram pages and our website for notices and updates. Our calendar continues to be as full as ever, though as global health challenges continue, some of our activities still will be taking place online. Whatever your heritage, whatever your faith, whomever you love, however you identify, and whatever your state of mind, happy, joyful, sad, angry, frustrated, afraid, courageous, bold, you are always welcome here.
I lit the chalice this morning, and I wanted to share the words of L. Jones, who's written the Abolitionist Intimacies, and I'll be talking more about that later. People in prison talk to me about time, how it means different things in captivity than it does in the free world. They talk about how time sits on you, how you try to do your own time, how you wait for time, how you fill time, how you are controlled by time. So often I'm dealing with too much time. Now we don't know if we have enough time. And now the time for all ages. So I'm going to read Goodnight Moon by Margaret Wise Brown. Oops. It is on. It is on. Yes, thank you. Hi. So I'm going to sit down in this lovely seat. My name's Linda. What's your name? Eleanor. And what's your name? Kaylin? Kaylin. Good to meet you both. So have you ever seen this book before, Goodnight Moon? I bet there's some other people who've seen Goodnight Moon, and maybe they've heard the story. It's such a good story, you might even end up reading it with me, right? Goodnight Moon, because it's the kind of story that parents read to their kids and grandparents read to their kids when they're about to go to bed. And even though you're not going to go to bed, right? You didn't come to church to go to bed. You're gonna go out and play after this, but we're gonna just go through Goodnight Moon. So it starts off with the little rabbit in bed. I can't read upside down. I'm going to have to turn the book around, sorry. In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of
A cow jumping over the moon.
a cow jumping over the moon. That's right. And there were 3 little bears
Sitting in chairs.
sitting on chairs, exactly. And 2 little kittens and a pair of mittens. Yes, they are reading with me. And a little toy house and a young mouse. And a comb and a brush and a bowl full of mush. Yeah. And a quiet old lady who is whispering, hush. Good night, room.
Good night, stars.
Good night, stars. Good night, moon. Good night, cow jumping over the moon. Good night, light and the red balloon. Good night, bears.
Sitting in chairs.
Good night, chairs. We can say good night to the bears sitting in chairs. Good night, kittens.
Good night, mittens.
And good night, mittens, exactly. Oh, and now we come to good night, clocks. And good night, socks. Clocks and socks rhymes. Good night, little house. And good night, mouse, yes. Good night, comb, and good night, brush. What rhymes with brush? Good night, nobody. Good night, mush. Yeah, delicious mush. And good night to the old lady whispering, hush. And you got it. Good night, stars. Good night, air. What's the last one? Good night, noises everywhere. Thank you so much for reading this with me. Such a good story. We're really glad you were with us this morning, and I know that you're going to go have some fun outside with Rita. She's got plans, so we're going to play a little music. Alex was going to play a little music, and we'll see you later. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you for the lovely rendition of Good Night, Moon. Now is the time in this service when we honor our personal joys and sorrows, challenges and celebrations of our lives by silently placing a smooth pebble into the water. As many of you know from pre-COVID times, and as we did last week, we're now inviting members of the congregation to participate in this. So those of you who wish to may share in this moment. As you come forward and silently place a stone in one of the bowls, you can watch the ripples extend outwards and imagine them continuing beyond the bowl, through and past the pews, out the doors, and into the larger community of all. You are now invited to come forward in 2 lines through the middle pews there, and we'll honor your joys and sorrows silently. And I placed one final.
Elle Jones, in her book, Abolitionist Intimacies, has a lot of poetry. In one of her poems, she does her version of Goodnight Moon. She calls it Goodnight Jail. In a provincial jail, there's a little room with a toilet and a sink and a smell of mildew, and a slit of a window with a sliver of the moon, and a radio on a shelf playing a tune, and a metal cot and a metal slot, and a night that's either too cold or too hot, and an officer in a spot by the stairs, and 3 more guards sitting in chairs, and the shadow of the laws that put people in there, and the eye of the camera watching you sitting, and a photocopied picture of your mother and children, and a heart with a hole for the loved ones you're missing, and restless dreams where you wake up shivering, and a door with a lock, and a window with bars, and a corner of the sky showing just 1 star, and a comb and a brush, and a toilet that won't flush, and a guard on his rounds ordering hush. So good night, room like a little tomb. Good night, window barely showing the moon. Good night, laws that aren't changing soon. Good night, radio. Good night, news. Good night, cot. Good night, slot. Good night, down in solitary where the world forgot. Good night, sheets tied up in a knot. Good night, bad dreams and regretful thoughts. Good night, clanging doors and the camera shot. Good night, locks. Good night, clocks. Good night, countdown to the day you get out of the box. Good night, mildew. Good night, mold. Good night, lights on all night down in the hole. Good night, heart with its little hole. Good night, heat. Good night, cold. Good night, foam mattress. Good night, comb. Good night to the crumpled picture of home. Good night, dripping sink and toilet that won't flush. And good night to the officers ordering hush. Good night, patrols. Good night, stars. Good night, outside. Good night, air. Good night, love. good night care, good night prisoners everywhere. And now it's time for us to sing again, I'm on My Way, number 116 in the Grace Hymnal. And we're going to sing all the verses, and the choir is going to join us.
Thanks, everybody, for that joyful song. Perhaps she needs no introduction, but I'm introducing Reverend Linda Goonewardene. She's an affiliate community minister with FirstU and has served in that capacity since 2014. She co-facilitates the Mental Health Support and Action Group. Linda works as a psychotherapist specializing in addiction treatment and recovery. For her own physical and mental health, Linda drinks tea and rides her one-speed bicycle whenever she can. Welcome, Linda.
How free are we? Prisons all around. Freedom and incarceration are big topics that include many ethical strands, some of which include punishment, humanity, faith, oppression, safety, justice, and community. Theologian Charles Schulz has a way of capturing some of these ideas in a cartoon. As Lucy walks with Charlie Brown, she tells him, sooner or later, there's one thing you're going to have to learn. You reap what you sow. You get out of life exactly what you put into it. No more and no less. Snoopy has been following along, and he stops to sit and ponder Lucy's words. As he continues his doggy perambulation, he thinks, I'd like to see a little more margin for error. And while Lucy's message is a realistic perspective, I lean strongly towards Snoopy's position. As a Unitarian Universalist who strives to affirm and promote our 8 principles, I lean strongly towards Snoopy's position. We need larger margins for errors and successes, and it is up to us as religious liberals to make sure everyone has access to those margins. Jailing people for crimes committed is a central part of Canada's justice system. As Lucy said, you reap what you sow. Yet our prison system is rooted in settler colonialism and anti-Black racism. Elle Jones, who is, I think, a prophet, she's also a poet, a journalist, a professor, and an activist. She has written a book, which I have here, Abolitionist Intimacies. This book reminds us of how the carceral state operates. As Justin Pichet, who's an Ottawa University professor, states, Elle Jones makes visible the devastating impacts of Canadian laws, institutions, policies, and practices on people and communities who are pushed to the margins. Reading this book will inform you more fully than today's pulpit essay. I hope to focus on a few aspects as we delve into how free we are when our society includes systemic violence. When I lived in the States, I was appalled at the #1 in the world incarceration rate of the United States. As a Canadian, I comforted myself with Canada's lower rank. We're only 94th in the world. So per 100,000 people, the US has 738 people in prison. Canada is approximately 1/7 of that, with only 107 per 100,000 people. And that sounds pretty good, right? Yet there are other statistics which reveal something else. And I could have gone way diving down into all kinds of statistics, but I didn't want to put you all to sleep. So I'm just going to stick with a simple category, which is not simple at all, but categories of race. They're always more complex than these simple titles indicate, and yet they do serve a basic purpose in helping us to understand some aspects of systemic racism. In the Canadian prison system, white people make up 55% of the prison population, yet they are 73% of the general population. With Indigenous people, they are approximately 26% of the incarcerated, and yet only 5% of the population in Canada. This is about 5 times greater. And while for Black people, the rate is just over twice the general population, with Black people making up 9% of those imprisoned and being only 4% of the population. So even though we have a lower incarceration rate than the States, it's nothing to be too proud of. I mean, they're the top country, unfortunately, except unless Carl was explaining to me, you look at certain countries where the whole country is like a jail. So let me continue. American prison chaplain, Father Mike Bryant, stated in the book Choosing Mercy by Antoinette Bosco, he says, our prisons are social trash compactors. We believe that if you stick everybody together, the medically unhealthy and the mentally ill, the socially deviant and those who live on the margins, that we'll come out with something magically different. Well, we do. Recidivism, or a return to prison rates, of about 75% among juveniles and 63% among adults. So that's the American prison chaplain. Then I looked up the Canadian rates. If we want to return to our racial categories, the recidivism rates for whites is 48%. For Indigenous people, it can be up to 70%. And for Black people, it's 41%. None of these indicate a system that is effective in supporting a safe and healthy community. Punishment without rehabilitation becomes a circular trap. When every problem is viewed as a nail, then only a hammer is used. Yet many people struggle, and the legal system can't be the only solution. As someone who works in the mental health field, I can't count the number of family members I have supported when we stared together into the empty canyon of social supports and despairingly just wait for the legal system to be the last resort for change. I'm going to assume that none of you have been to prison, nor perhaps care about someone who has, and yet statistically, some of us have and are. For the rest of us, why do issues of imprisonment matter? So I have another cartoon. This one is Calvin and Hobbes, that illustrates notions of vengeance, deliberate negative actions, and consequences. Calvin is a 6-year-old boy with rambunctious creative energy, and Hobbes is his simultaneously wise and giddy stuffed tiger companion. One day, Calvin says to Hobbes, "Whenever I need to do some serious thinking, I go for a walk in the woods. There are always a million distractions out here. I don't believe in ethics anymore. As far as I'm concerned, the ends justify the means. Get what you can while the getting's good. That's what I say. Might makes right. The winners write the history books. It's a dog-eat-dog world, so I'll have to do whatever I have to and let others argue about whether it's right or not." During this rambling spiel on ethics, Hobbes the tiger is gamely walking and playing in the woods with Calvin. All of a sudden, the tiger shoves the little boy, who ends up covered in mud and down on the ground. "Hey," spurts Calvin, "why'd you do that?" "You were in my way," said Hobbes. "Now you're not." The ends justify the means. "I didn't mean for everyone, you dolt. Just me," retorts Calvin. "Ah," responds the tiger and walks away. If we as Unitarian Universalists wish to be true to our denominational history of social activism, in which the words and deeds of prophetic women and men challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with fairness, mercy, and the transforming power of love, if we truly believe in the principles on which to which our congregation covenants, principles that are based on the belief in the inherent worth and dignity of each person on this planet, principles that promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, then what goes on in the Canadian criminal justice system does concern us. As Calvin and Hobbes remind us, ethics can be simple when applied to individuals. It can get much more complicated when we include other people we know or don't know in our ethical deliberations. And this brings me to another joke. It's called Work versus Prison, and here are some excerpts. In prison, you spend the majority of your time in an 8x10 cell. At work, you spend most of your time in a 6x8 cubicle. In prison, you get 3 meals a day. At work, you only get a break for 1 meal, and then you have to pay for it. In prison, you get time off for good behavior. At work, you get rewarded for good behavior with more work. In prison, a guard locks and unlocks all the doors for you. At work, you must carry around a security card and unlock and open all the doors yourself. In prison, there are wardens who are often sadistic. At work, they are called managers. Like a lot of jokes, and I apologize to the managers out there, because I assume some of you might be managers. Like a lot of jokes, this one has elements of truth, elements of exaggeration, and some elements that are completely untrue. Yet it is a reminder of the freedoms of living in the world and being employed versus the freedoms of being in jail. This joke also points out how institutionalized and oppressive many jobs can be. When I read Going Up the River, Travels in a Prison Nation by Joseph T. Hallinan, I was surprised and disappointed in this line. He writes, after spending 10 years as a journalist visiting U.S. prisons, after the end of the Cold War, the military-industrial complex has given way to the prison-industrial complex. Like military bases, prisons provide jobs and lucrative corporate contracts for services, while simultaneously providing a sense of security from criminals. He also points out that in the earliest days of American prisons, prisons and religion were closely intertwined. The men who ran them were often theologians, and their goal was to turn their wayward charges into Christians. Later in the 1920s and beyond, the medical model was supposed to cure the disease of crime. When the medical model failed, religion started to creep back in. This religious tendency is informed by fundamentalist or Orthodox Christianity from the Old Testament, with its justification of an eye for an eye. As religious liberals, I believe we have a duty to counteract this moral aspect of crime with our humanitarian perspective that includes rehabilitation, reconciliation, and restorative justice, instead of dwelling in simplistic punishment. Let's return to Canada and Elle Jones. She talks about white supremacy, which expresses itself as a system that simultaneously claims authority to know best, but also makes claims to innocence. She continues, "It strikes me as very Canadian, this way of doing violence through bureaucracy. One can point to the Indian Act and removal of orders for Africville and land titles and all other forms of how the state dispossesses people at the stroke of a pen. But it's also the way paperwork can be appealed to as a way of disavowing anti-Blackness. We are to think of paperwork as neutral, as something beyond human agency." She continues, "It's a polite way of killing people, of checking the boxes and throwing up your hands and saying, the process must prevail." Elle Jones describes her fight against prisons as a fight against militarization, houselessness and poverty, gendered expectations, and patriarchy, and all forms of confinement and control. Well, that is a tall order. Elle Jones not only writes poems and tells stories of people in Canadian prisons, she also offers suggestions for what can be done to counteract the violence of incarceration and punishment. Elle Jones states that the work of abolition lives in our communities every day, including in our refusal to abandon or dehumanize those living inside the walls. One of the reasons that I shared Goodnight Moon with the children today with the Time for All Ages was partly because she wrote her own poem, Goodnight Jail, and also because I came across a program that goes into prisons and tapes the parents reading children's stories and then sends those tapes to the children. So even though the parents can be there in person, and I actually brought a few of those books along that were on the list of books that parents really want to read to their kids. And I thought that just that small act of saying, even though you're in prison, you're still a parent, and that's important to you, and we're going to make this happen. And those are the kinds of things that Elle Jones talks about in her book, is how do you bring humanity into a system that is so rigid and punitive and shaming. So her book is full of all sorts of stories similar to that. And if you want to go further on this journey of reclaiming justice, please read her book, Abolitionist Intimacies. There are invaluable groups already doing some of this work, including particularly the Elizabeth Fry Society and the John Howard Society. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can be part of a group of people who are trying to make things better. On this Canada Day weekend, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that whenever our flag flies, it is recognized as a symbol of democracy, of freedom, and of hope. Today, we have explored what freedom can mean to people who experience oppression in Canada due to ongoing racism, classism, ableism, and capitalism. And I wanted to end with some words from Elle Jones on freedom. She says, "We cannot think of our freedom without remembering our unfreedom. May we live our lives with our UU principles in a way that expands the freedom of all people to live in a Canada that is more just and kind than it is today. The work of freedom continues." And I can't remember what we're doing next because I have lost my, there it is, okay. Yes, so were you going to provide some music for reflection, Alex? That would be lovely.
Thank you very much, Reverend Linda and Alex. A lot of food for thought. And I'll proceed with the invitation to our offering. This congregation has a long history of care, vitality, and bringing people together to move the arc of justice forward. We have been able to live into our hopes and dreams because of the generosity of those within and beyond this community. Whether you're here in Worship Hall or anywhere else, you're part of this community. To make a gift in the support of the congregation, you don't need to use the baskets that are now beginning to make their way among our pews. Wherever you are, you're invited to go to our website or contact our finance manager to find out how to make a donation or keep up with your pledge. Our gifts are freely given and gratefully received. We dedicate these gifts to the work of this community of faith, serving human wholeness, caring for the planet, upholding religious freedom, welcoming the stranger, loving one another. And I know, So now we'll do our closing hymn. Can I invite the choir to come forward again? The closing hymn is Break Not the Circle, number 323 in the gray hymnal. Please rise in body and spirit as we sing. Before we begin to close this time of worship and reflection, a reminder that coffee hour, fellowship hour, will resume in Fellowship Hall immediately after the service. And for those watching from home, an informal online fellowship hour will begin at noon. You can find the Zoom link on our website or in EUU to join up for the EUU. You can subscribe by going to the communications page of the church website. Also, I believe leafy greens, courtesy of the folks at Ajashki, are available for those who'd like to, some from the Grow Towers in the former volunteer room just near Fellowship Hall. We extinguish our chalice this morning to a reading by Lama Surya Das, Awakening to the Sacred. When I was young, I believed that one had to travel far and wide in order to seek truth. I believed that truth would most likely be found in the world's so-called sacred spaces. Yet the fact is, the truth is everywhere. It knows no religious, cultural, temporal, or ethnic bounds. Truth is the perfect circle. Its center is everywhere. Its circumference stretches into infinite space. The land on which we stand is sacred, no matter where we stand. This morning's chalice is extinguished, but our connections and faith remain. Let us sing together, Spirit of Life. Go in peace, go in love, go in joy, and may all be well. Yes.
There's supposed to be a song. There's supposed to be a song for it.